the equivalent of taking a stick of dynamite to my own life. That's how I've described it to other people. It's one thing if, lifestyle and the constantly climbing resume orientation, respect and appreciation for authority, especially people who are willing to invest in me and my growth and my education, professional, personal, and so on, to say, no thanks. There's something else I have to do was a huge thing. And I think a lot of people, it's one thing where you reevaluate your life. If, your relationship doesn't work out, you get divorced, you are forced to figure your stuff out. If you were fired, you are forced to figure out how to make a living, get a new job. And I kind of knew that I'm not going to be able to make the kind of change I want in my life and be the person I want to be unless I'm the only person who can blow my own stuff up. Like the road less traveled, Robert Frost.
Yeah.
I wanted to be the person who took the road less traveled.
My name is John, and this is Please Allow Me. Today we sit down and share tequila with Erica Zendell of Zen and the Art of Fighting. She's a jiu-jitsu world champion, a writer, soon-to-be published author, and huge supporter of the Oxford comma. We discuss the nature of sacrifice, lessons learned living on the road, and what it takes to quit the rat race and chase something no one understands but you. Before we get started, I want to take a second to shout out our first ever sponsor, Dirt Culture. These guys are a couple of absolute units. They've created a content house and a clothing line inspired by people and moments in the world around us. If you ever wanted to sit on a fine Westminster button sofa sipping 3 fingers of Old Forester while listening to Stevie Nicks on vinyl, well, that's what their art and gear feels like to me. That's a mood with a scent to it. Check the link in the bio. And now, without further ado. Shalom, Erica.
Thank you for indulging my holiday, my culture.
It's the least I can do. On this Yom Kippur, I'm going to come out firing right off the rip.
All right. It sounds like I'm going to have something to atone for after this podcast is over.
Well, I was going to ask you for what have you atoned for today?
So the theme I always go back to, and I think this started maybe when I started working in tech, the tendency to be really hard on myself, and the person I most need to forgive is me. Mm-hmm. Not to say that I haven't wronged other people, but that's a theme that continues to come up when I toss the breadcrumbs into the ocean and do the tashlich and think about forgiveness of for any sins I've committed against others. I think I'm far and away most brutal on myself.
Why? Why do you think you are that hard on yourself? Not why do you think you're hard on yourself, but what's the reason do you think you're hard on yourself?
Perhaps a fear that I'll otherwise be really complacent, and that there are a lot of reasons in a culture of self-care and compassion to otherwise not necessarily rest on your laurels and slack off, but I don't know. My dad was an attorney. He was a hard grinding guy. My mom worked for my dad. I grew up in a household where any sort of break, not to say it was a source of weakness, but that you should always be pushing for the next thing, the next line of business, doing the very best you could for yourself, for your client. And I think that I internalized that largely from an academic perspective as a kid and then from a professional one.
So rather than getting out of that setting and looking at it as a reprieve and kind of, having a more cavalier take on things, you internalized it and kept pushing forward. My dad was super frugal, and he kept trying to teach me about money and things like that. The minute I got out from under his roof, I just spent like a fucking drunken sailor. So I think I took the exact opposite approach that you did.
Well, I think part of it too. I mean, I grew up in northern New Jersey. My dad's dad was like a shoemaker, came over from Poland, grew up in Paterson, New Jersey, which if you know anything about New Jersey, it's not among the nicer areas. I wouldn't say it's like the level of Camden, which is a pretty high crime area, but Paterson was up there. It used to be an affluent Silk City, and then it kind of fell from grace.
Is that the home of Reuben Carter, the Hurricane?
Perhaps.
Great Bob Dylan song. And a great boxer.
But yeah, he kind of worked his way up from nothing. Dad was a shoemaker, died a realtor, my grandfather. And my dad built his law practice from scratch, born and died essentially in that office at 27 Church Street.
So then how does someone who, from the outside has led probably a very like calculated adult life, Princeton grad, Sloan grad, probably on like a C-suite track to whatever job you could ever dream of, someone, very high achiever. How do you go from doing all that to like packing a stinky gi up? And you're doing so many things traditionally. You basically, I'm surprised your boyfriend can even leave the state with you without it being a felony. You pack a gi up, quit all your jobs, and you're going to hit the road to train jiu-jitsu and write a book. How's that happen?
I mean, I think everyone's got their COVID or pandemic story as a forcing function for some sort of reevaluation of who they are, what matters to them. And I think at the beginning of COVID in particular, when people thought it was perhaps a lot more lethal, health-wise, societal, that's a different conversation and take. And for me, there were, I guess, three things that happened during COVID. One, the actual lockdowns, the city that I loved, the routine of going to train, going to work, interacting with people. My job as a product and project manager was very dependent on being able to talk to people, be in the same room, and removing that kind of context and like relationship building was a huge hit on what I was able to do. So the COVID, the actual lockdowns, my dad passed away on April Fool's Day. Cruel joke. He's probably laughing.
But something like what you've undertaken now, like that's not something that just comes up like COVID rears its ugly head in the city, everything locks down in 90 days. You're not packed up and leaving it. It seems like there must have been something percolating under the surface for a really long time for you to, and using COVID may have been just like the trigger and it made it actionable. But had you not thought about this for a long time before that, or did it really just pop up because of COVID?
Well, I think that COVID was the first of the three strikes, and then I was out. So there was COVID, my dad passed away, and that caused a lot of reflection over how much of my life was me trying to live in the realization of some version of the ideal he had for me. I never dated anyone Jewish, at least not seriously, for an extended period of time. So strike on that. At least 3 for 3. The 3 previous guys I dated all dropped out of college, so wasn't getting the like prestigious Ivy League or Stanford grad to get the nice like brick house in the suburbs of Westchester. So strike 2 on that.
Westchester sucks.
The third thing after that, so COVID, my dad passing away, and I turned 30. And I think I'd had this idea of my life when I graduated Princeton, went to MIT, of I want to be on 30 under 30, because that is what is marketed as the next level of success if you are not a management consultant, investment banker, or, entrepreneur with a Series A funding round to your name.
Why does any of that matter? I mean, when I kind of had that self-reflection in 25, I turned 25 in like an army barracks, and I felt terrible about looking up at that ceiling, but I didn't think of it in terms of those types of benchmarks. Why do those things matter? And like, shouldn't it be something a little bit more internal? Like, maybe I don't have this title, but I'm happy about where I'm at. Was there unhappiness without those titles? And do those titles bring happiness?
I think I always chased it, and then by the time I got there, I was left empty every time. I remember the day that I got into college, and I didn't just get into Princeton, and this is going to sound pretty pompous, but
that's what we're here for.
I think I applied to every Ivy except Brown, and I got into all of them. I remember I was sitting at my boyfriend at the time's house, opening the admissions letters, and I think his feedback at the time is like, I'm surprised that you're not more like emotional or reacting more or even happy about it. Because I got the thing that I said I wanted. My father hung the pennants that came in the mail, more like figuratively framed every admissions letter. I think I'd applied to like 17 colleges and gotten to 15. Something crazy.
That begs the question, where didn't you get in? Can I guess?
Sure.
Georgetown?
Didn't apply there.
Okay. Stanford?
Yes, I got waitlisted. Well, I didn't get waitlisted. I think I got deferred and then declined.
Berkeley?
For grad school, I got rejected from Berkeley.
All right, I give up. Who else passed on this for undergrad?
I think it was Wash U.
Really?
Yeah, they put me, I think, on the either decline me or put me on the wait list because they didn't think I was taking them seriously, and they were right.
Suckers.
I mean, at the time, I had I had a very particular pitch, which in hindsight did not reflect my college experience, but would ultimately reflect my professional one, which was I was a woman who was pursuing engineering and business. The program I thought I would do was this like dual degree program at Penn, and I did like a summer program around it where I spent basically 3 weeks not sleeping and in Philadelphia, meeting a lot of people and going really hard. And I was surprised when I got into that. And that was probably the first time where I chose something different. I think even if I hadn't gotten into, Princeton, that was like a first inflection point of I could come away with a degree from like Wharton and the School of Engineering and go a really hardcore pre-professional specialized route. And that was the first time I'm like, I deserve the freedom to not put myself in the box yet. And when I went to Princeton, I started off as an engineer, and then by the end of my first semester, after more or less like failing physics, I'm like, I'm gonna give myself a semester off. The
sabbatical.
I'm gonna study whatever I want to study. I only have I have to do a computer science course and one more semester of physics because I'd done a lot of other requirements, and I'll see where I land. And that was the semester that kind of changed everything. I took linguistics. I took a course on Chinese foreign relations. I took Portuguese, which I would not.
Poha, my bro.
Which I didn't know what jiu-jitsu was. It's interesting that I studied that in college really intensely. Didn't know what jiu-jitsu was, and I focused specifically on like Brazil and sports in Brazil.
Well, the universe has a strange way of connecting things at some point in your life.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that I got into a dual degree program of like management and engineering, and in the end I became an engineering manager just like 5 years later.
Is that what you thought you'd be when you were growing up and when you were going through this process of like going to all these high-end universities?
I mean, when I think about the things I enjoyed the most in high school, I had some phenomenal like math and science teachers. I gravitated towards chemistry. I had an amazing calculus teacher, and I was like, this is cool. And the thing that I did kind of extracurricularly, like I had a lot of fun like soldering freaking circuit boards. Mm-hmm. In addition to, trying to be competitive on a varsity tennis team and lacrosse team until my senior year where I decided I want to go on a trip with my art history teacher who was phenomenal, Carol DeVito, shout out.
This sounds like a novel.
So I went on a trip to, what was it? Paris and a few other places. Can't remember right off the top of my head. And I chose that instead of lacrosse preseason in Orlando. Truly a magical place. Mm-hmm. And I was going to get benched for my senior year varsity season, and I was going to be captain, and I said screw it, and instead I ended up running track with a guy named Paul Surrey, who was a wonderful track coach, and that was the first and only time I took running super seriously, and I ran a half marathon before the end of high school.
Man, that's a lot of influences and positive influences. Math teachers and art history teachers. I had a cool wrestling coach. That was about it for me. And I had a kind of a history teacher that I didn't really like, so I tried really hard in his class. But that's about it for people that affected me in high school, other than my crew. I
mean, I had some amazing high school teachers. The person who was like my high school sweetheart, he was the son of one of the history teachers there, and the history office was shared in part with the language office. And my thing, if you knew me before jiu-jitsu, before any food business stuff, before any business stuff, was study foreign languages was the thing that like lit me up. Mm-hmm. I had an awesome Latin teacher, awesome Spanish teacher, instilled a real love of literature. And the Spanish teacher in particular would always bake cookies on Fridays, both for her classes and for the people in the office. So I also got a love of baking from her as well.
I'd be down for some churros right about now.
So she didn't make churros, but Senora Cantor made like these espresso white chocolate chip cookies. And,
Senor.
Yeah, she was just a like joyful, interesting person, and she's the one quotation that I think of when I think of Senora Cantor is like, in terms of like an ethos or way of living, is like life should be many things, but it should never be boring.
I get on board with that, and that segues really nicely. So right now, after all of that, you are living on the road, mm-hmm. place to place, out of a Subaru with your boyfriend Buggles, a tiny little adopted dog, your newly minted purple belt, and you're unemployed.
Yep.
It's quite a shift.
It is the equivalent of taking a stick of dynamite to my own life. That's how I've described it to other people. It's one thing if, my previous employer, ASICS, had said, "You're no good," and fired me. They tried to keep me, and I remember it was after Memorial Day. It was before Memorial Day weekend, where my boss at the time, and arguably the best boss I ever had, was like, "There's this project that comes due in November. Can you do it?" And I felt like a tightness in my chest of, I desperately want to tell you yes, but I'm going to need the weekend to think about it. And then I think June 1st, the end of Memorial Day weekend, there's something I have to tell you. And that was one of the hardest conversations I've ever had to have, because I think in a lifestyle and the constantly climbing resume orientation, respect and appreciation for authority, especially people who are willing to invest in me and my growth and my education, professional, personal, and so on, to say, no thanks, there's something else I have to do, was a huge thing. And I think a lot of people, it's one thing where you reevaluate your life. If, your relationship doesn't work out, you get divorced, you are forced to figure your stuff out. If you were fired, you were forced to figure out how to make a living, get a new job. And I kind of knew that I'm not going to be able to make the kind of change I want in my life and be the person I want to be unless I'm the only person who can blow my own stuff up.
Well, what's the kind of person you want to be, and how is it different from the kind of person you saw yourself as before the big move? For lack of a better poetic turn of phrase, it's like the road less traveled, Robert Frost. Yeah.
I wanted to be the person who took the road less traveled.
And now that you're taking the road less traveled, what's the driving force on the road? I mean, it seems to me the two main things you're pursuing, like from an outsider's perspective, are jiu-jitsu and writing. Mm-hmm. But is there anything deeper than that you're pursuing? Do jiu-jitsu and writing lead to any other sort of inner peace or anything else that you're seeking on the road that is being camouflaged by the writing in the jiu-jitsu? Or is it really just as simple as it seems?
I think there's a broader question too. When I got to the end of the COVID year, the turning 30, where every woman turns 30, and my mother, bless her heart, has not been banging on my door about grandchildren or about when are you going to get married. She hasn't done that. No one does, maybe because they're afraid that I'm going to beat them up over it.
Yeah.
But I think there were a lot of questions, and I think of my first manager when I started working in tech, who I think now has some 4 or 5 daughters, which is hilarious, knowing Corey Morris as a bon vivant, very charismatic, brilliant guy. First and best manager I had in the tech industry. And the way that he talked about his wife or his relationship, he was about to have his first child when I started working for him. And his wife was is a badass. He said, I wanted to make sure, or we both wanted to make sure, that we had done everything that we wanted to do for the two of us and chart every course, explore every path for if we were going to have a settled kind of life, that we had no regrets of the things we might have done before we had an additional responsibility. And I think that was something that I thought about, whether the responsibility, I'm not thinking necessarily about even marriage or kids, but the down payment on the condo, which was something that was considered at the end of last year, after almost 9 years of living in Boston. I'm like, oh, should I be putting down money and trying to find a semi-forever place?
Do you think that at some point that road less traveled will, the desire to be on that road will change, and you'll want to be, have a permanent place, and you'll want to have put down the down payment on the condo? Or do you think that once you're on that road less traveled, it's so goddamn freeing? I live a pretty relaxed life myself, and I kind of do whatever the hell I want to do. And I just can't see myself not being with someone or in a situation in my life where I have to stop doing these things, and I feel more handcuffed than I feel right now, and like bound to a place, bound to a thing, bound to I've never had a boss, but bound to a boss or bound to a job. I don't think that's ever going to happen for me, despite the fact that growing up and through my 30s, I thought at some point I'm going to kind of calm down and I'm going to want that. At some point I'm going to kind of calm down and I'll want that. I feel like I've calmed down a lot, but I still don't want any of that fucking shit.
I think it comes down to, for the next year, who knows how long we'll be traveling, of determining when I think of the concept of home, what does that mean? And where do I find a sense of home? Is it in a particular place? Is it with a particular group of people? I think the big thing, I write a newsletter every month as part of my own accountability to people who are invested or want to subscribe to the missives and field notes from the traveling. And I think in the first one, when I wrote in like the top 3 things that I'd learned on the road so far, is that continuity is as much of a privilege as change. And I think there is value in having at least some sort of base out of which to, station yourself. In my case, it has to be Boston, in part out of history, in part out of having a storage unit here. In the end, whether it's here or somewhere else that I settle, I got to clear out that storage unit.
Right.
But yeah, remains to be seen, and open to, the trip's still early. I'm still within the first 6 months.
It's still early and it's within 6 months, but that's quite a long time actually when you look at it from the other perspective, to be on the road and doing this. And as you're going through this process and you're doing all the jiu-jitsu training and you're writing, what is the focus of the writing? Is this kind of is this some sort of cathartic thing that's making you feel good? Are you documenting every place that you go? What will be the end product, do you think?
A book, though one of my friends who I consider in the council of my creative enablers says, don't necessarily be wedded to the concept of a book. It can be a zine. It can be some sort of other form of published media. But I think I've known since 2018 in particular, it has to be a book. My soul will not rest until I can see my name and a spine on a cover at Trident Booksellers in Boston or Barnes & Noble in Oklahoma City.
Is that because you love writing?
For whatever reason, I've been possessed and believe that this is the thing that I was put on earth to do, which was to share some sort of story and bring other people along for fulfilling whatever their version of their best looks like.
Do you think you got good at writing because you believe you were put on this earth to do it, or do you think you were naturally good at it?
I was definitely not naturally good at it. So I've been keeping a blog. So I started blogging, I think, in 2011. I was a comp lit major trying to legitimize my own major to myself because Lord knows it wasn't employable. I graduated unemployed from Princeton.
I've never been employable, so I wouldn't feel bad about that.
Well, when you spend 4 years being told you're the creme de la creme and you are an attractive job prospect no matter what you study, whether you're an English major or an operations research and financial engineering major, I'm like, oh, comp lit, I'm fluent in multiple languages. This should be easy. Nah, I graduated unemployed. The job that ultimately brought me to Boston took me 6 to 8 months to get, and multiple interviews, which I had to pay out of pocket to haul ass up here. But
that whole shit sounds miserable.
Yeah, but I remember the last time that I came up. It was in June of 2012. It was about a week after graduation, and I walked out of South Station, and I had some weird, tingly, magical feeling of this is the place you're supposed to be. Even if this opportunity doesn't work out, this is the place you're supposed to be. But your question was about did I think I was born to do it or great? I read some of my blog posts from that first summer I was in Boston. Terrible.
I think you're a phenomenal writer, and I have books over there. Some of them I've read, some of them I've just looked at really briefly and looked at the back cover. And I think you're a really good writer. I think your emails are well written, your texts are well written. When
I care about punctuation.
You care about, thank God. Can we talk about the Oxford comma for a second?
Sure.
Yes or no? Oxford comma.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone who says no to the Oxford comma is some sort of a cretin as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, everything you do is very well written. And not only is it well written, but it's very thoughtful. It appears to be very thought out. Do you think there is a line between being a thoughtful person and being someone who overthinks things to the point of paralysis?
I think that is the big question of this entire trip. And
who'd have thunk that I would hit on that?
Well, I mean, you saw me when I walked into Broadway in March of 2017, where I had really nothing left to lose. That was as rock bottom as I would be. That was me at my worst, far and away.
You came into the gym when you were at rock bottom. Is that why you came into the gym? If you were riding high on, some sort of a promotion or some sort of a career path, would you have never even entertained such a thing? Or is it kind of like this intersection of circumstances that led you into the annals of 36 West Broadway?
I mean, I had achieved like a major professional milestone a week before I walked into Broadway. I had launched the project that would make my career, make me employable, interviewable. It gave me a story. I'd launched this website. Wayfair has a bunch of different brands. There's Wayfair, there's All Modern, there's Joss & Main. They have a site that a few people don't know about called Paragold, which is kind of a peer to Our House and other like high-end furniture retailers. And I'd launched that site with a team, like a skeleton crew of engineers in 10 weeks. And I remember being like in London on vacation, visiting a friend in January, and I was on calls, making sure my dev team was like staying on track for it. And that launched on March 15th, 2017. I remember getting to the end of, the light at the end of the tunnel.
The Ides of March?
Yeah. And I guess that was the beginning of killing the old self. Maybe of that the professional success was going to completely do it for me.
So you finished that project up and...
I finished that project up, and then a former member of Broadway who had been badgering me to come in.
Match.John, where you at?
He had texted me when I had a friend and a former coworker over, a woman named Kate. Kate and I had worked together in my first job in Boston. She had been the assistant to the professor that I had been working as a researcher for. And as long as I'd known Kate, she'd been kind of like sedentary, very smart. She's like, I think from the Lexington area, went to Harvard undergrad, really smart, good head on her shoulders, awesome person and a good friend. And she'd been engaged to her high school sweetheart for a significant period of time, had been sedentary for as long as I'd known her. And then the next time I saw her, which was on March 17th, 2017, and I had her over for dinner at my apartment in Chinatown, she was marathoning and powerlifting, and her engagement had been called off, and she would basically say that, like, this is the best thing that I've ever done. And when she saw me kind of down in the dumps and I just launched this major work project, which should have made me happy, I should have been doing well. She's like, you need something to get your swagger back. And Match texted me right around that time. And also my ex, who I was getting over at the time, had sent a vitriolic text message to the effect of, I'm never going to pay you the rent that I owe you.
Yeesh.
So those three things on St. Patrick's Day, plus a good friend who I knew from startup baking days who said, you need a hobby and dating doesn't count. Those are the three people that I attribute to how I ended up in jiu-jitsu.
So this is a yes or no question. The ex-boyfriend who refuses to pay for his chunk of rent, if you ran into him right now, could you, yes or no, kick his ass?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, next question. So you're accomplishing this huge thing with the website for Wayfair. I've been on that website, I think. But you're down in the dumps. Was the cause for being down in the dumps the relationship, or was it just kind of being stuck in this like path of milestone after milestone and corporate, hierarchical bullshit?
Column A and column B. I mean, the relationship officially ended the Sunday before Cyber Monday. So I remember walking into the office after a night of, crying and not sleeping and negotiating and bargaining, dealing with however many cycles of grief. I'm sure any engineer who I worked with at the time could remember the way that I looked and felt that day in November. It was a long undoing, and the reason that the rent issue was coming up was I wanted to get away from the ghosts in the old apartment and move into a different unit, which brought up the in the words of Rihanna, the bitch better have my money conversations. And those
Gotcha.
happened a lot in March. And eventually I would get that money back. It would take a couple of months, but that came kind of at the expense of my soul a little bit, because I became very hung up on it. And that's another thing to sort of think about for the trip, and what's changed in my own life because of it, where how much of my identity revolved around the professional achievement and how much money I could make to support myself, and kind of say like, fuck you to my dad, who would hold money over my head a lot.
So is there a chance this book will be called How Erica Got Her Groove Back?
I mean, I'm open to titles and considerations. I should buy the domain.
You should buy it. I'm going to buy it actually first. You know, I'm a domain gobbler. Do you edit text messages? Do you write them and then go back and fix things and rephrase things before you send them?
I mean, you're outing me, JC. I probably have text messages that I've wanted to write to you that I put in the notes app that I edit and rework, because I'm like, he's gonna, or like, and not just to you, but I'd say especially to you, because I'm like, context can, like, when there's no context, text is a hard medium. When I am in a particularly emotional state, either high or low, it is probably not a good time to send a particular message.
What if you just prefaced it with, I'm in an extremely high state of emotion or a low state of emotion. Here's a little stream of consciousness.
I feel bad about encumbering people with that emotional state, unless
you worry too much.
Probably.
Yeah, you do. I don't give a fuck about anything.
I mean, poor Buggy, boyfriend. Before I made this trip, I think it was midnight, Tuesday evening, before I'm supposed to fly out the following morning and wake up at 6. I'm in tears, like sobbing of, what if people ask me about this book and I can't say, oh, I've got a great manuscript, I've got all these sample chapters and things are going exceptionally well. And I'm like losing my mind. He's like, are we really doing this now?
Well, the truth is that anyone that asks you that, none of them are writing a book.
Yeah, if there's one thing I've learned about that, is in the same way that, you know, take earning a black belt, like really earning it requires, if not like 10 actual years, like 10 years worth of like the commitment to the cause. The same is true for writing, or really anything that you care about mastering. And the advice I would often give to friends who are also charting some road less traveled of their own is, if it's really worth it to you, you have to be prepared to dig deep for 10 years. Yeah.
Someone once told me, if it matters, you'll move a mountain. If it doesn't, you won't. I also think that, like, as someone who has semi-lived a life less ordinary, people will make comments or ask you questions, and sometimes they're pointed, sometimes they're not. At the end of the day, most of those people, they only fall into one of two categories. They really, really want to support you, or they're a little bit jealous of you. And either way, like, you should be grateful for the people that support you, but the people that are jealous of you and like kind of want to, you know, turn their nose up at, oh, you're on the road writing a book, doing jiu-jitsu stuff, or, oh, you don't want a job, you want to like run a jiu-jitsu gym and corner guys in fucking fights and stuff. I mean, at the end of the day, those people have to get up at 7 a.m. and go to a job that they hate, and they could probably come home to a fat fucking girlfriend or fat bald boyfriend that they fucking hate, and they're just jealous that you're living your life, and you know, you're actually one of the people taking a chance to follow something, for whatever this means, that is a dream of yours. And those people just hate it, and they hate that you're doing it, and they're projecting what they see every morning in the mirror on you.
Yeah, that's on them to figure out with a therapist. A little bit, but I try to pay attention personally to, if I'm jealous of something, like, why is that? What is that person, like, what is not quite right in my soul, or what is that person bringing out in me? I was always told that, like, if jealousy or envy or something else is a mirror or criticism, in the end you should be pointing the finger back at yourself and thinking, how does that reflect some other kind of internal state? The thing I always ask myself about is comparison to other people. Of, in the end, is this a desire to feel like better than somebody else, or like a desire to feel like worse than, for whatever reason, in the attempt to motivate? I pay attention to that a lot, both from a writing perspective and in the training room, and then, you know, when I was in professional opportunities or academic ones, of kind of this constant state of comparison-related envy and the solution that I had to that in academics, and I'm trying to adopt with both writing and jiu-jitsu, is in college I did my best to be incomparable and to follow my own version of major events, the things that I wanted to study, so that I could to make myself as unique as possible, so I couldn't possibly compare myself to other people, so that if I had to take a more conventional job later on, I could say, yeah, I took a break from the workforce, but I got to do this thing that, whether I'm VP of product or director of marketing or just a total individual contributor, I've done something that no one else can really take away from me.
Have you ever seen The Secret Life of Walter Mitty?
I haven't, but I've read the short story years ago.
It's like a cheesy little movie. It's got a dope soundtrack though.
Okay.
And there's a cool thing in the end where, he's kind of like, I think he works for like Time Life or whatever. I won't bore you with the details, but at the end of it, he goes on this, he basically loses his job and goes to chase this woman across, I don't know, the world, and all the things he encounters at his next job interview. Meanwhile, he's on this dating app and he's like, fielding calls from potential, women to date, and he writes down all the things he had done in the time where he chased this woman as his job resume. And it's awesome. And just that little bit in the end is very cool. But going back to being on the road for jiu-jitsu and for writing, what do you think, are there any parallels in jiu-jitsu and writing? Not in so much the execution of either or, but in how you conceptually approach them and what each one means to you.
I think there's another layer too of how, in the end, it's about finding some sort of purest version of self-expression. Of, if I am writing at my best and doing jiu-jitsu at my best, it is, an unfettered, unabashed version of my own like personality or who I seek to be in the world.
What will you do if writing your best and doing jiu-jitsu at your best does not yield a book or a gold medal at Worlds at black belt?
At least I gave it my damned best shot. And it's more than a lot of other people could say for any sort of pursuit, let alone jiu-jitsu or writing. I
think that's a humongously important lesson, especially for people who are hard on themselves and their own worst critics. Like, there's a good chance, especially when you set lofty goals for yourself, that you don't make it. But I mean, one of the reasons you're an outlier is because you do set lofty goals for yourself. And even when you fall a little bit short, whatever the stupid, cliche is, you're still outshining lots and lots of other people. But, it can be a tough pill to swallow sometimes. And I know, I have to deal with that all the time. I mean, there are lots of goals I've had in my life that I never achieved, but just finishing shy of my goals, people seem to be very supportive and kind of remarkable of what you've done, or they think what you've done is remarkable. And then you just think it's old hat because it's like second or third place to you. But
yeah, I mean, after there was a tournament in Oklahoma City this past weekend where Buggy was coaching from the sidelines and talking to one of our training partners in Oklahoma. And he was saying to her, I bet you that when Erica comes over, instead of being happy about her gold medal or going 9-1 for the day, what she's going to say is, I'm still mad about that ref's decision, or I should have won that. And I said something to that effect immediately. There's a benefit to kind of like never being satisfied or always wanting more, but it's a gift and a curse to continue to strive. And
right. I think exactly what you said. Like, it's definitely a blessing and a burden. I mean, at some point you have to reconcile, that you're not always going to get exactly what you strive for. But there's a delicate balance. Sometimes it motivates you. And it's kind of like that, the balance between being thoughtful and overthinking things. I can be thoughtful about a tournament or a project or something, and then when I overthink it, it starts to stress me out too much. I mean, honestly, I think I've never been stressed in my life other than during COVID. I didn't know if I was going to close the gym and when I was going to fail my 10th grade French exam, and my dad was pissed that I was going to have to go to summer school. But I think those are like the only two times I've really been stressed in my life. But you know what I'm saying? I mean, there's disappointment in that, and being disappointed in your results is different than getting like stressed and frantic about your results. Like, being thoughtful, you go back to your hotel, you go back to your house, and you try and regroup and you lick your wounds for the next one. But being frantic is like well, my dad said I did this when I was a kid. locking yourself in the closet for a week and crying every time you lose a wrestling match. Like, that's not healthy.
I mean, I would argue I am trying, one of the goals of the road trip could be improving my relationship with the creative process and with jiu-jitsu. That if I fail enough and take enough shots at bat in different training rooms and in the attempt to publish, that perhaps I'll have a better relationship with the idea of like failure or the number of times you need to fall down in order to ultimately stand up.
Yeah, there's a meme that goes around on, some stupid ass Instagram page all the time, and it's some iteration of, most people give up right before the breakthrough or some shit like that. So, and it just encourages people to keep banging their heads against the wall. It's like, you do have to know when to pull the plug on something, and when not to. But that's probably a conversation for another time. Since you've been on the road and you don't really have a home base and you're Airbnb-ing it and you got the dog and you're driving the Forester or whatever you guys are pushing down there, what are the things you've learned that you never expected you were going to learn? What things did you run into, situations, predicaments, problems, or just pleasant surprises that you never thought you'd run into?
Well, I certainly never thought I would find myself in Calera, Oklahoma, which is, in the words of one training partner from Houston who was there for her super fight and went to support her, and one of the instructors that we were training with in Oklahoma City is BFE, which I had to look up on Urban Dictionary as
Bumfuck Egypt.
Yep. So yeah, if you would have told me I'd find myself in Calera, Oklahoma, getting drive-through barbecue and rushing to watch two people I otherwise never would have met were it not for this trip, on an outdoor stage at top-notch dispensary, I'd be like, you're kidding. And that the lengths I would go to for people I had only interacted with a short time.
Do you ever think that Princeton must be really proud of you for that?
I mean, we'll see if I end up being profiled in the Alumni Weekly for something other than a podcast that I quit after maybe a year and a half, or the one time I wrote an article for them and got paid for it. Maybe one day they'll be proud of me. I like to think that they admit people in hopes that they will be noteworthy alumni. And
I like to joke that no one's proud of me, and and I actually don't care. And so
other lessons though, I think people romanticize what it's like to be a digital nomad or a jiu-jitsu nomad, that it sounds like a dream to train in different places and have that kind of opportunity, and it is a privilege and it's awesome. It comes with a different cost. You develop relationships, familiarity, trust with training partners in a given room, comfort in a given city, to deliberately uproot yourself in the spirit of learning all you can from a bunch of different places, especially with the concept of like créanche, or however, I feel like that word's hard to describe, like traitorious.
Well, I can clear something up for you really quickly. Sure. The concept of créanche is not what people in the jiu-jitsu community colloquially think it is. Créanche isn't someone who like comes up in a gym and then switches gyms because they've moved or because it's going to improve their training. A créanche is someone who comes up in a gym, never pays a membership. The coaches go out of their way for them. They go outside of the normal service and customer relationship, and then the student says, you know what? Thanks for giving me free training. Thanks for driving me to these tournaments. Thanks for paying my food bill. Thanks for giving me money when I didn't have any. Thanks for letting me sleep in the gym when my girlfriend kicked me out because I was sleeping with her friend. And thank you. The best thing for me is to go to this other gym. And what the créanche really means is I've taken everything I can take from you for free, and now I'm going to go and try and take from somebody else for free. That's really what a créanche is. Mm-hmm. Anyone that you approach respectfully and you say, I'm going to do X, Y, Z because this is going to make me a better person, whether it's I'm quitting my job or I'm changing jiu-jitsu gyms or I'm moving to another city. Anyone that hates on you for trying to improve yourself, your life, or your jiu-jitsu, you shouldn't value that person's opinion anyway. They can go kick rocks. But a créanche is a little bit different. And I understand I've got a lot more years in this community than some people do. And it can be a little bit off-putting to think that someone might consider you a créanche. But also, it's just like so many things at the end of the day. Just who fucking cares what anyone thinks about you? Live your life and be happy.
Yeah. But at the same time, and going to a lot of these places, I don't want to be seen as a tourist. I want to have, whether you call it a study abroad experience or being invested in a place and its people, I think Bourdain kind of puts it best, be a traveler, not a tourist.
Okay. And do you think that people will treat you differently if they see you as a traveler or a tourist? I mean, we're talking about jiu-jitsu mats.
I mean, I think it depends on the gym. Places that see a lot of travelers come through for the purposes of saying, I trained at X place, take the picture, and move on. That's not the kind of person I am. That's not the kind of person I want to be. I want to, there's the concept in hiking of leave no trace, or try to leave things better than you found them. Mm-hmm. That's kind of what I aspire to do in every aspect.
Well, I think when it comes to jiu-jitsu gyms, the people that are worthwhile are the ones that are going to look at you coming in from somewhere and you're here for a month, and they're going to say, hey, there's a girl my weight and my skill level. Let me see what she knows, and hopefully she can make me better. And rather than being like, oh, she's just here because maybe the instructor is famous.
Or the instructor is famous, or there's some like greater writing thing. It's like, there is a greater writing thing. I won't dispute that. But I mean, I feel very fortunate for the experiences I've had so far, of whether it was like a more senior training partner who found me valuable, or a less experienced training partner who was grateful for what I had to share, or just pushing them a little bit harder than maybe someone else had in the more steady environment that they were used to.
What do you make of current jiu-jitsu culture, and what differences have you noticed in your travels from gym to gym, or even like geographical region to geographical region? Jiu-jitsu culture, if you want my opinion, I mean, I think it's fucked. I hate it. I mean, I got into this when jiu-jitsu was intrinsically tied to fighting. Like you started training jiu-jitsu because it was a piece of MMA, not because you started jiu-jitsu because you wanted to, play worm guard and win on advantages somewhere. So I have a very not that that's bad. I don't think it's bad, but I have a different perspective.
Between sports and sport jiu-jitsu.
I have a different perspective on it.
State of jiu-jitsu culture. I think it's not unique to jiu-jitsu. I think it's a greater social thing of people are expecting perhaps too much from a sport, whether it's in tech, an institution, an employer. People are like, when I to some extent, I see a lot of there are the parallels between jiu-jitsu and writing. Then there's parallels between jiu-jitsu and tech. As a product manager, as a woman leading a team of largely male engineers, there's still, kind of the fight to be respected, the fight to not be seen as a thing to be fucked, or, otherwise like wooed and won over.
I suffer with that myself.
But I also, a lot of the stuff that's happened in jiu-jitsu now, it's not unique to jiu-jitsu, and, doing better and making things safer. I think there's only so much you can do to an institution by, raising the red flags. I'm kind of a believer of you lead by example, and you change things from the inside quietly. You advocate when something is blatantly wrong. But in the end, be the change you wish to see in the community, in the workplace, in your team.
I feel like, not to cut you off, but I feel like part of the problem with, I think you're addressing one small part of jiu-jitsu culture, which is like the activism side of it. And I think that it's valuable for people to be proactive about, making a community perceived as safer or more welcoming or any of those things. But the percentage of people in jiu-jitsu who are doing things that make the community unsafe is so minuscule compared to the percentage of people in the jiu-jitsu community that have to suffer the tirades of those false activists who are trying to bring down everyone who looks at you the wrong way. It's just one of those things. I think that I'll probably get canceled right now. I mean, I think of the gym as a sanctuary. If something is going wrong there and the instructor needs to know about it, the instructor needs to kick someone out. If it's the instructor, then we need to take them down, and we need to make sure that people are safe and people are whatever. But we live in a world now where Reddit and Twitter create these false realities where people can communicate within a subculture or a small niche and never actually participate in any of those cultures or niches. But it forces the people who run those subcultures and niches to govern as if the people on the internet were going to participate in those subcultures or niches, if that makes any sense. Basically, what I'm trying to say is there's a bunch of motherfuckers on the Reddit Jiu-Jitsu forum that I don't think have ever been in a gym anywhere, and they're pissing and moaning, telling people to quit gyms because some guy starts a post about a brown belt cross-faced me too hard. You should quit that gym, bro. Oh, they want me to sign a contract. Well, you should quit that gym, bro. Well, I mean, let's get serious here. You've never been in a gym. You're never going to train, yet you're having an effect on the people who do run gyms. There has to be some way to compartmentalize the activism in jiu-jitsu without ruining the sport and making it so people never want to go into a gym.
I mean, I'm far and away, I'm not an expert in any of this. The thing that comes to mind is something that I think like the head of school, like my high school, would send out, and he sent out some email during the COVID year of, you kind of need to figure, like, the most important thing that you can possibly learn is your understanding of, like, how do you come to your own version of the truth, and like what, like, whether it's studying history, studying science, studying XYZ, with the abundance of information that exists, the lack of context. I think I have become much more self-conscious a writer in recent years, in part because of tech and worrying about stakeholder management and perception and organizational politics, but also just because the way the internet's changed. The stuff that I wrote in 2012 was terrible, but I was less afraid of, would I get canceled for saying how I felt or what I believed at the time. I think I wrote a post like when I'd gotten back from China and how like it had increased my respect for the US. This was in 2013 when I went to China for work, or gave me a renewed sense of maybe like patriotism or nuance of thought of like what is good about the US. And I wonder if would I have had the courage, would the climate have been as hostile if I were to post the same kind of thing now? Would I have dared to even write it? And I'm not sure. And I think that that's kind of true for a lot of like the internet culture, not just in jiu-jitsu, but everything else. I think Gia Tolentino writes in a book, Trick Mirror. There's an essay in it called The I in Internet. And she talks about like her, like the early days of blogging versus the now, where people can engage in a comment thread and there's no consequence for effectively tearing somebody's life apart in a bunch of comments. And I think about that as a writer of, I try to think, mostly it's the what if you fail? Mm-hmm. But then there's the other question of like, what if you succeed? Lord knows I'm not going to be able, I'm going to make someone else read the comments and tell me what I need to know, what's worth responding to or not. Because otherwise I could see myself getting in a vicious, thought-consuming loop.
Yeah. I think one of the things, like, success makes you more susceptible to fragility. Like, when you have nothing to lose, right? But when you start to have some success, you're worried about maintaining that. And you're worried about every action that you make, is that going to, take a chunk out of what you've built and what you've established. And it's certainly a tough balance. But in regards to certain things, I think that regardless of, internet cancel culture and all those other things, sometimes you have a responsibility to say something. Like, had you returned from your trip to China now in present day, sure, there's the risk of somehow you getting canceled. But also I think like that specific instance, you probably have more of a responsibility to report exactly what you saw than maybe you would have back in 2012. I think that people self-censoring is a humongous problem because it robs everyone else of just different perspectives and, even the opportunity to have like reasonable discourse, which, like you said, like if you get in the comments, you're not going to have reasonable discourse. You don't know who these motherfuckers are. You don't know if you're talking to a 12-year-old, a 42-year-old. You don't know who anyone is on the internet. So, I mean, my policy is never get into any internet beef because you just can't win. You can never win because this guy who disagrees with you, more people will come to tear you down than will come to support you. And so you'll always look like you've lost that problem on the internet. And in terms of bringing like greater politics into the jiu-jitsu scene, I mean, that's one of the problems with the jiu-jitsu culture. I mean, there are several other problems, and I think that there's an unholy union between jiu-jitsu and other combat sports and social media. And I think that lots of people participate in jiu-jitsu, combat sports as an accessory, something cosmetic to their social media profile. Hey, guess what else I do? I want to take a picture in my gi for my Bumble profile. I totally did that. But you know what I mean? Like,
actually?
No, I didn't know. But it's one of those things where it becomes an accessory for people. And it's a very different reason for getting into jiu-jitsu than the reasons why I got into jiu-jitsu. And so I kind of like looked at, I mean, it's probably a fault of mine, but I looked down my nose at a lot of that, because simultaneously, those are the motherfuckers going to my gym and paying memberships and, you know, allowing me to, you know, order pizza and pay my bar tab. So I guess I should just shut up and be appreciative, or should I try and change the culture to something more like it was when I got involved?
I mean, it begs the question too, was what got you started the reason that still keeps you going? Obviously now you're a business owner, but from a practitioner standpoint, has your why changed? And there's a question I ask a lot of people from a couple of lenses: as a practitioner, as a competitor, and as a teacher.
I would say for me, like, I got into jiu-jitsu because as a guy who wrestled and had done some judo, and then you're kind of in between colleges at some point, there wasn't a lot going on. Like, and, you know, wrestlers would get together. I mean, this is a long time ago. Wrestlers would get together, and then, you know, UFC was becoming a thing, and we learned submissions off this like Bass Rutten, you know, VHS series. But we just loved the physical contact. We loved the competition. And really, like, I mean, I don't consider myself a martial artist. I consider myself a guy who likes to have a good dust up, and martial arts is the way that you can go about having that and satisfying that urge. I mean, I still love competing. I don't love it the way that I used to, but I think I don't love it the way I used to because my body's failed me. And I feel like it puts me at a disadvantageous position. If my body hasn't failed me, I mean, I don't know I don't know yes or no, would I still be so driven to compete? I mean, I still like to compete, but I know going into a competition, it's like, I only have so many swords I can use. And if they fail on me, you know, physically, I don't have the other options anymore. But I think other things kind of take hold and grip you. And one of the things that does that is, for me, it's having, like, you know, even however many students you have, it doesn't matter. There's only going to be a small number of them that are dedicated to the instructor, right? There's only going to be a handful of relationships. It doesn't matter if you're a high school history teacher, a jiu-jitsu teacher, or whatever. And it's a sense of obligation to me that I owe those people something. And it's like, oh, well, I still teach jiu-jitsu and I still have my gym, because it's fucking fun and I love jiu-jitsu and I love training, but also there have been various points in my life where I've had an opportunity to walk away from that, and I felt an obligation to people. And I felt I got on a road with this person, and I'm not willing to get off the road with this person until they have a black belt tied around their waist. And I'm not taking any shortcuts. But then you do that, and you get these people very close, and then someone else comes along. And now they're just starting out, and now you're on the road with this person. And so it's kind of this never-ending cycle of, you know, feeling indebted to, in the best possible way, feeling indebted to students who believe in you and what you're doing, and you want to then nurture them and make sure they get all the things they need out of the relationship and can, like, milk you for every ounce of knowledge that can possibly help them. So I guess that's kind of like my why, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah. That covers it.
Yeah. What is your why for writing your book and being on the road and doing jiu-jitsu?
Break that down. The why for writing the book is, I think it was when I had my contemplation, could not train, could not really do anything else, of the pandemic, of what is the thing that if I died tomorrow, I got deathly ill and was in the hospital, the thing that I would regret not having done. That was front and center.
I don't think I have one of those things.
Maybe because you've already done it.
Maybe I have. I mean, kudos to me. So breaking it down further.
So you said writing the book.
The jiu-jitsu on the road. Yep. Does one fuel the other? Is the need for content fueling your jiu-jitsu portion of this, or vice versa?
I mean, I think I could have written this book staying in Boston. I think it just wouldn't. I think it would be a different kind of interesting, of staying in one place, changing the lifestyle, maybe training more frequently. But
well, there are shitloads of jiu-jitsu books out there, and some of them are like, getting into people's minds, like documenting training habits, what's the best way to learn. And, they all kind of focus around jiu-jitsu, but they have a bigger picture story to be told. What's the bigger picture story that you're telling with your book?
You're going to have to ask me a year from now.
Okay. How far along are you on the book?
Not as far as I'd like to be, but I'm also probably not giving myself enough credit for the research I've done so far. When I met up with an old training partner for coffee today, I was explaining how the closest thing to a book that I've ever written was a senior thesis in college, which is effectively a book. It's at least like 100-something pages. Michael Lewis will talk about his own thesis experience as something he wanted to do more of, and fellow alumnus and all that.
I think I plagiarized mine.
Mine is published in some thesis library, still in print, because they made us get the print copies in Mudd Library in Princeton, New Jersey. So if you want to pull up Red Circuses in Steel under Erica Zendell, you will find it.
Oh, lovely, lovely.
Some light reading.
Mine is definitely not peer reviewed. What about getting on the road, and like, what are the things you've given up? Like, how does the nature of sacrifice play into what you've done?
I'll get back to that, but my point with the thesis, at least, was I think I spent the first 4 to 5 months just like purely researching. I had a proposal, like a couple of pages, but I didn't write my first chapter until like the end of January of my senior year, and then was done by April. So I'd say the research process took a lot, like in hindsight, I'm like, I spent a lot of time doing the research, and it's okay that I haven't got, manuscript, sample chapters, like a ton of finished product yet. So that's how far along I am. I have a draft of a proposal, a couple sample chapters, newsletters, and other pieces of writing to show for the trip. But in terms of like polished work, part of me being hard on myself is, like you should have that already. But I'm like, but remember, the last time you did something remotely similar to this, it took you like 5 to 6 months, which is effectively how long I've been on this trip so far.
Well, it seems like you're at a point where like the momentum can take over. And you're too far to not continue on that trip.
Yeah, that's for sure. To your point of sacrifice of like what I've given up, there's the obvious of paycheck, 9 to 5, and all of the, there's benevolent structure to that. There's ease of going into a cocktail party or a conversation, particularly with people on the East Coast, of the first question is like, where are you, like, who are you, where are you from, what do you do for a living? Having easy answers to those questions.
You think you don't have an easy answer to that?
Where I'm from has become a lot more of a complicated question in the last couple of months. I used to say I was from New Jersey. Now I say I was from Boston. I was like, I'm not sure where, a year from now, where I'm going to say that I was from. It comes down to the concept of home.
So I've lived in a lot of places. I have a concept of home that I don't feel the need to tell anybody about. When people ask me where I'm from, I say, I've bounced around a lot of places. Most recently, I'm in Boston. And I just don't feel the need. And generally, people don't ask another question. Yeah.
I think part of the things that I've given up or lost on this trip is this idea that there will be a simple answer to the simple question.
Mm-hmm. And when they ask you what you're doing, do you say, hey man, I'm writing this book, or I'm off doing jiu-jitsu, or I'm pursuing a creative endeavor?
Said I recently quit my job in order to, train jiu-jitsu full-time and write a book. Buggy in particular likes to say, she's a full-time jiu-jitsu competitor, which I feel it's not I don't consider it disingenuous, but until I take a paid super fight, I would not say that I am a professional, because I have not been paid to do jiu-jitsu yet.
The term professional jiu-jitero is so insane to me, because I don't even know what the fuck that means. What does that mean?
Professional pajama fighter.
Yeah, but I mean, at what point does someone go from amateur to professional? And we don't have a structure like that. You either do jiu-jitsu or you don't do do jiu-jitsu. You either compete or you don't. You either make money or you don't. I see it on the internet all the time. Someone made a post the other day and it's like, well, this guy's a blue belt, but he's a professional judoka. And I said, what the fuck is a professional judoka? Did he win an Olympic gold medal? No. Okay. And even if he did, jiu-jitsu, the Olympics are about amateur competition. I don't even know what a professional jiu-jitsu person is. There are so few people who don't own academies that are able to make money off of jiu-jitsu. And I guess it's this part of the kind of the nebulous structure of the community that we operate in. I think, I've never said that I was a professional jiu-jitsu fighter.
I'm trying to think about your question about sacrifice too. I think when I first had the inkling about doing this trip, I was in Mexico City sitting in a coffee shop. And the phrase or something, I don't know if it was from a book or something else I'd read, is like, you have to give up who you are to be what you might become. So that's what I think about with sacrifice. And I was like, well, who am I? It's like, I am this person from Boston. I train at this place. I live this kind of life. I do this sort of job. I was, I don't want to say complacent, but comfortable. Probably too comfortable.
I always think of sacrifice as giving up something good to get something better.
I mean, I would say that whether it's better is still uncertain, but being willing to take the risk is a good thing.
And being on the road in terms of like other relationships that you maintain, do you think you've sacrificed personal relationships? I mean, obviously, you probably made Buggy drive you out there and stuff like that, so he had to come. But what about other things? I mean, like, do you ever think about that if you do have to return somewhere, whether it's Boston or New Jersey, will there be an infrastructure there for you to return to similar to the one that was there for you when you left?
I think, nothing is impervious to the flow of time. It's like building, maybe I built, the most robust sandcastle I could have possibly built in New Jersey with, family, in Boston with people at Broadway or other places. The tide's going to come in and there might be semblances of the thing that I've built or the foundation I'd had the foundation might still be there, but the castles might have been eroded or even gone. I think no matter where I end up, maybe there's some foundation beneath the tide or hurricane or what have you, depending on the level of damage or erosion that's happened in my own life and what I built there.
That's kind of an impactful statement you're making there, and I feel some kind of way over here about that.
I can't. Well, I can hope that the people that I said goodbye to will, hold a candle. I also can't be upset that when I come back that the candle might have blown out and I need to light it again.
Jesus Christ. Erica, I'm going to switch gears here. It's twice today. COVID,
yep.
the vid. What are you experiencing as you go from state to state and gym to gym, and you're sweating in people's face and you're dripping into their eyes and everyone is all over each other? They know you're on the road. What has your experience been surrounding COVID as you go down this path that you're on?
So for people who are listening to this, the places I've been to so far are Houston, for a meaningful amount of time, meaning over 2 months or around 2 months, are Houston, Austin, and Oklahoma City. I think Texas has consistently been one of the more open places since the pandemic started. Oklahoma City has also apparently been pretty open, just talking to people that I've trained with now and asking them what things were like in the initial lockdowns. I think they opened up pretty quickly, or they found a way to continue operating. I'd say it's a question worth asking when I get to California about a month from now of how things are like for them, what the perceptions are like there. But the people who are willing to take the risk, continue to pursue the practice that keeps them mentally and physically grounded, healthy, social. They're not to say it's like they're disregarding ideas about public health, but they care about everything that the sport brings them. And it's not just an exercise or working out. If that were the case, they could just go for walks outside, go running, buy the Peloton. Jiu-Jitsu is more than that. And I definitely felt that gap when things in Boston locked down in March of 2020.
Are you concerned at all about California being your next stop and having Gavin Newsom win the recall? I mean, honestly, they've overreached so much in that state. If it were me, I would be concerned. I'm not taking one side or the other. I might be concerned that he'd lock everything down again now that the election is over.
I think once you take people out of the cage, they won't go back into the cage quite so gently. And that said,
I'm torn on that concept.
We put down a deposit for an Airbnb. Worst case, we go somewhere else. That is one of the blessings of not being tied to, a 1-year lease in a given place. There will be other places we can go back to that we are confident that, we can improvise. There's plenty of structure on this trip, but I guess much like anything even a game plan in a jiu-jitsu competition, you have your plan, but more often than not, things are not going to go your perfect way to spec. So you have to be willing to dance a little bit, just follow the structure.
I agree with you that it's tough to put people back in the cage, but the other side of that coin is we now see how easy it is to scare people into doing whatever we want. And I get torn on that idea because we were out of the cage for hundreds of years and they just put us in the cage again. And I wonder if lockdowns and things like that came back, would it be a situation where people are like, hell no, we're never going backwards? Or if it's like, well, guys, we've done it again. I have a friend who says, well, you know what? The masks aren't a big deal. They're just kind of a nuisance. Let's just put them back on. And it's like, but that's the first step. That was in 2020, this is how it all started with baby steps. And if you don't see that, okay, sure, maybe I'm nuts and putting the masks back on and vaccine mandates, maybe they're not steps down a path towards some sort of further government overreach. But for me, it is, I'm out of the cage, I'm not going back. But for other people, I feel like there's a sense of, well, we did it before, it wasn't that bad, we lived, we made it through it, let's just listen and try and figure it all out.
I think whether people acknowledge it or turn a blind eye to it, one of the most impressionable things that I saw were certain politicians who were going to weddings or having enormous lavish parties.
Oh, they're all such a bunch of scumbags.
So that speaks volumes. Where was it the rules for thee but not for me?
Right.
When you have, or you go to the Met, the Met Gala and these events among the elite in society or popular culture are able to kind of live as they see fit, maybe with certain a hat tip towards a restriction. I guess everyone at the Met Gala got vaccinated, and Nicki Minaj is the one who was making a stink about not going and not having it. But to your point around at least whether it was California, I really don't. What I think back to is in the end of 2020 and probably the first direction of the catalyst towards this trip, I traveled more at the end of 2020 than I probably had the previous 5 years of my life. And the coworkers that I had at the time, I remember being so nervous of saying, I was traveling to be there for my friend for her 30th birthday, someone who I hadn't, she and I, my first real friend in Boston. And it's I would go to the ends of the earth for her. I'd be an asshole to not go to Chicago for her 30th because I know that mattered to her. And everyone else that she knew in Boston was too fearful, too cautious. I'm I don't want to die regretting that I didn't celebrate Katie's birthday with her. And then I went to, where else that year? Went to Orlando for Pans. I went to Atlanta for the Atlanta Open and Nogi Pans. I went to Mexico City. And I thought what will my coworkers think about this? And a lot of them were very risk averse and understandable. ASICS is a very traditionally Japanese company, and the country was very rigorous around lockdown, sanitation. It's a miracle the Olympics even happened in 2021 in a lot of ways. I think a lot of people are willing to live with the cognitive dissonance of, they will say, they will make certain decisions for their own life and lifestyle and preach a certain thing on social media. But it's a minute when they have a friend, and I think for some people it might have been me, who was a paradox of, they kind of turn a blind eye to the fact that, like, in order for Erica to be good at this sport that is part of her identity and that she cares about, she has to be willingly, like, sweating in other people's mouths and have other people sweating in her mouths. So if I were to really, press the button on that with my colleagues from last year, I'm not sure what they would say about it. I remember being worried about it, but part of me was wondering, like, you don't have a problem with the fact that I'm still, even if in a pod, I am almost daily putting myself in close proximity and trusting that if that person gets really sick, they're going to stay home, or that I get sick, I'm going to stay home.
So I want to get back to what you just said about jiu-jitsu being part of your identity. Do you ever get concerned or struggle with the idea that something so fleeting and temporary is part of your identity, which is something that's so permanent?
I mean, I think that that's another thing I've learned on the trip, where after kind of burning myself to wit's end with competing and seeing my identity as a competitor, the big question that I have grappled with, for lack of a better word, was, who am I if I don't compete? Or what does it mean if I take time off from competing to chase, like, a better, broader, more balanced version of my game without the constant stress of honing an A game, having, like, the selfishness that is kind of needed to be successful at competition, of, like, drilling a certain kind of schedule, and to what extent is the focus on competition taking away from the creative work too, because it kind of fries the brain.
I mean, the identity of as a competitor, though, that can be, depending on stages of life and injuries, like, that can be temporary. But at some point, they're going to take jiu-jitsu away from you. Like, this universe is going to take it away from you. And I mean, I know that that's something I struggle with. I mean, Father Time's undefeated, and it's not up to us. At some point, they're going to tell you it's time to stop playing the game. I
mean, the universe could take writing away from me. I could get in a car accident tomorrow and have a brain injury, and I couldn't string a sentence together tomorrow. In the end, I think it's...
I'm not going to be able to string a sentence together in like an hour.
Just doing the best with the time I have for as long as I'm able to do it. And if the identity is forced into changing... I remember when I graduated from college, I didn't know I had celiac disease. And I had seen myself as, like, living overseas in China or Brazil, whether it was in foreign service or business or something else. And when I found that out of... you're going to have to be, like, gluten-free, not just for fun, but for medical reasons. That threw a huge wrench into this idea of I was going to work overseas in China, because you can't get around not having soy sauce and everything, into the concept of a food allergy, let alone being a vegetarian,
right,
is a challenging thing. So I think that was, like, the first major shift I ever had in a sense of, like, identity, or who I wanted to be and what I wanted to do, and having to have a forced reset on it. So in the end, it's like being confident that if and when my identity is forced to change, or I choose to change it, I've done it before, I can do it again. And it's just a matter of finding out what it's going to be, if it even matters.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. For me, it's tough. I mean, I've had this common thread in my life since I was 12 years old. And, now that I'm 30, it's going to be, if someone takes it away from me, I don't know what the hell I'm going to do, but whatever. I guess I'll have to deal with that. Maybe I'll just move to Key West, start drinking rum and Coke and writing books in little shacks.
Yeah, as long as you don't meet the Hemingway end.
Yeah. What is the writing process like for you? When you sit down and you want to put pen to paper and you want to bring the ideas from your mind to the page, walk me through that.
I think it's different. Well, in a perfect situation, which rarely happens, or something that I was doing at the beginning of the year that I'm itching to get back to. The goal that I had for myself was, like, 3,000 words a day, which would take me about 2 hours worth of, like, sitting uninterrupted, no distractions, in a coffee shop or a, like, quiet place, of just brain dumping on a particular theme or question or thing that I cared about working on. That's one version to go about it. And eventually you just keep hacking away at that. You will come up with something good. It's just a matter of writing, revising.
Well, you'll come up with something good. I don't know that everyone's going to come up with something good.
Well, or even if it is just, like, one sentence, after a while you will you'll start getting real gold, not just fool's gold. But the thing that I notice is in an emotional state where I'm finally writing something on the lines of like a Hunter S. Thompson or, a Chuck Palahniuk in Fight Club. It's often in times like those, I don't have a notebook, or I'm afraid of the extremity of how I feel, that I kind of wait for the feeling to pass. And those are the moments that I could do a lot better job in capturing, because in the end, that's what's going to make people read what I have to say, the not shying away from the extremes of the experience. I often worry that when I talked about the experience earlier on the podcast of before flying out to Boston, having like the sobbing in bed at midnight of what will people think if I have not made as much progress on this.
Fuck them.
The degree, the pain of that low, and the sense of failure, concern of what other people think, the concern of having let myself down, of the I don't have a paycheck, what do I have to show for this trip?
I want to interrupt you and ask you a question really quickly.
Sure.
And it's going to be a quick one so we can go back to this, because otherwise I'm going to forget. When you talk about sitting up in bed and wondering what will happen if people think that you're not as far along on this project as, what do you think they think you should be doing? Do you think anyone who's going to judge you has any idea what the process you're going through is like? And like, what's their frame of reference? Oh, my other friend quit their job and they went on the road to write a book and they were 50 pages ahead of where you are right now. They don't have any fucking idea.
That's true. And I'd say, when the cooler head prevails the next morning or the following week, it's like, yeah, essentially, fuck them. They don't know what you're doing. I'd say every person that I've talked to who's either gone through the actual process of writing a book or just has been involved in like marketing a finished product, they know that from inception to publish, it's usually no less than it's rarely less than 3 years.
I mean, you're living a pretty unique existence right now and doing something that most people, when they form an opinion about what you're doing, they have no frame of reference. They don't have any idea what this process is like. And for you to be concerned that they may judge you, it's probably overthinking.
Yeah. And I mean, mind you, I'm pretty certain that there are books I could have, popped out like a chicken laying an egg without having to think too hard about it, of like how to get into a certain kind of business school and refine your personal statement and storytelling to optimize your admissions results.
I wouldn't read that, Erica.
how to get into product management. Like, I could write all that stuff, but that's not the book I want to write. And to do the thing that I want to write correctly, or to do it right, that does take time. And for anyone to, when the cooler head prevails for me, once I wait for the feeling to pass, it's, you want to do right by yourself, which means this is going to take time.
So when you're writing something like if I ever have to write anything, which I very rarely do, and it comes out kind of like from raw emotion, like if I have to write about something, I want to do it directly after the experience or after I've thought about it, so that I can get kind of that raw feeling down, and then maybe I'll tweak a thing or two here. But then I start to tweak things and I'm like, wait a minute, now I'm getting further and further away from the experience or the thought that I'm trying to write about. And now it's just sounding too bland and vanilla and there's no emotion to it. And so there becomes this point where I'm doing too much to it. And it's kind of like betraying the sentiment that I was actually trying to put down on paper to begin with.
I mean, I definitely struggle with that. When I don't, strike while the iron is hot or while the feeling is fresh, it ends up getting... trying to think of what one person told me, or like it was almost like too disciplined, like I was putting myself into a corset when I should have just let everything all hang out. That's
a pretty good analogy.
I think I came up with the analogy. It was something that someone else had said that like led me down that path.
But that's true. I mean, like to an extent, you want to free form it a little bit so that people don't, so it doesn't come off as too contrived, buttoned up, or manufactured, but at the same time, it's got to be palatable. Mm-hmm. I feel like that about revenge. Like when someone wrongs me, I need to handle it immediately. Like the further away I go, the more I'm acting on principle and less on emotion.
I mean, if I were to think about the best feedback on my writing I've ever received, and this was before I think I had any resolute ambitions around writing a book. It was from a former coworker who I knew from working at Wayfair. And she had said, like, your writing is like jazz. And I'm like, if there is one way I would want people to continue to describe, and she explained why, which is this idea of like both improvisation and structure, emotion and chaos, but also like a clear idea of like mastery of like the classical form and how to put your own spin on it. And that is a really hard balance to strike, of the sense of like, chaos and structure at the same time.
Yeah, and I know there's definitely sometimes in music there can be a rift between classically trained jazz musicians and, you know, rock and rollers. So when this book is done, who do you want to read it? What's your avatar?
I mean, I obviously want you to read it.
I'm gonna read it, obviously. I'm hoping I get to write the foreword. I'm just kidding. It'll be really short.
I mean, I'll take any endorsements. Well, maybe not just any. I go back and forth on this question of like, who is this book for, and like, who's the audience? At first, you know, the obvious question is like, oh, is this for jiu-jitsu people or like women in jiu-jitsu? I'd say jiu-jitsu culture, which is about pirating instructionals or otherwise trying to get things for free. If this is just a book about jiu-jitsu and for jiu-jitsu people, and it's not relatable or interesting to other people, I have failed. This is not me trying to write my own version of BJJ Globetrotters. This isn't even my version of trying to write like Sam Sheridan's The Fighter's Heart or Fighter's Mind, though I could easily see my own version of The Fighter's Mind being a separate book, given the types of interviews and conversations I've had with various instructors, practitioners, and like other people in and around the community since traveling. If it is going to be about purely jiu-jitsu, it needs to be more like what Anthony Bourdain did in Kitchen Confidential, where it's a love letter. He describes it as a love letter to the people who cook. And this is like, whether it's the love letter to the people who fight, it doesn't have to be people who are fighting in a jiu-jitsu context. It's whatever thing in their own life that they are trying to conquer and see themselves succeed in. When
I look at a lot of the Bourdain stuff, and I've never read his books in their entirety, but excerpts and seen the show and stuff, it seems more like the restaurant aspect of it is kind of more of a scaffolding to get a greater message across. Mm-hmm. And I think that there have been attempts in the jiu-jitsu and combat sports world to do that, and they come off not very well at all. Not to impugn anyone's work, because I've written exactly one Facebook post, but you know, I think that can be a struggle in terms of like, it's almost like a scale, like it's too heavy on jiu-jitsu and less on the bigger picture, or too much on the big picture and less on the jiu-jitsu. Bourdain was able to strike the exact balance where the restaurant aspect of the creative things he did propped up the bigger picture.
Yeah, and it's tough because, you know, almost everyone is going to go into a restaurant at one point in their life. Not everyone's going to go into a combat sports facility of any sort.
But everyone has fought something, whether it's another person or something inside themselves at some point. And that to me is the entire most valuable thing about any of the combat sports training or competition or anything. It's when are you going to be the person that fights, or are you going to be the person that lets your opposition defeat you? You know, are you going to, and I think that's relatable to people, even if they've never walked into a gym or been in a fight or anything like that.
Totally.
The great modern day Longfellow, Roger Denton, once told me, it is true. Everyone is in fact a pussy, but everyone's a pussy in a different part of their life. And you have to kind of figure out, where are you able to fight? Where are you a pussy, and how do you fill those gaps in?
Well, you asked me earlier in this interview, why did I do this trip? I was a pussy in my work because I was unhappy and I didn't have the courage to quit until I did. And I made sure I scorched the earth enough that I wouldn't go back until I was done with the other thing I told myself I needed to do and believed I needed to do.
Thanks, Erica. Thanks for doing this. I appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to the finished product. And I'm sure you're going to paint a beautiful picture of jiu-jitsu and the road and relationships. And it'll be something for people to be envious of, not only the finished product, but also the life you're living while you're doing it.
Well, at least worth a follow-up interview, if nothing else.
No question. Thanks, everybody.